I wanted to hit you with some tips because everybody always asks, they see that dreaded zone 2 bike or run, and welcome, you can see it in the background. This is my basement quasi office headquarters, whatever you want to call it. So it's kind of a modern industrial look here, concrete and the bottom of our first floor level. So it's really modern Art Deco. But I wanted to talk to you about training in zone 2 because people see it on their workout and they're just like, well, and maybe do a fitness test and find out where your zone 2 is, and you're like, well, I have to walk to stay in this zone 2. So I wanted to kind of put some light on what zone 2 really means as far as my terminology and my vernacular goes when I talk to my athletes and doing training in zone 2. So a couple tips, I got them written down here so I can look while I'm talking to you. So zone 2 may or may not be your race day goal. The longer distance you're doing, the more you want to be in that zone 2, maybe high zone 2, low zone 3, because you're burning more fat than carbs. And if you're burning straight carbs and no fat, then you're going to have to replace those stores with food on a course. So the lower the zone you're in and the better you can be in that zone and be a little bit quicker, and the better your training is, you'll last a greater amount of time and you don't need as much nutrition as you're going along. But you may or may not be racing in zone 2. It just kind of depends on your distance you're going for. Excuse me. Zone 2 is easy, but it's not super easy. It's not just like, a stroll in the park. So you may have to put a little bit more effort into. But if you're working hard for zone 2, you should be able to talk in zone 2. So if you're looking at your watch, you're like, well, it feels like I'm having a conversation. It feels really easy. But then you're going through, you're like, I have a conversation, but my heart rate's a little bit out of my zone. I wouldn't sweat it too much. But like I said, if you're on a run and you're staying in zone 2 and you can have a conversation and it's pretty laid back and you don't feel like you're working so hard, that may be sufficient for a zone 2 type of run or workout. So more of a conversational pace, so you could talk to somebody if you're running with them. Over time, you're going to produce more work with less energy. So you should be more efficient. That heart rate zone should be a little bit lower, it should actually be a little bit harder. You have to kind of try to get in that zone 2. So you're faster, but you're not have to put as much effort into getting that fast. So over time, you should be able to stay in the zone 2, but you should be able to, get faster and faster kind of over time. Faster maybe, relative to each athlete. So maybe, 15 seconds per mile faster or something like that. But those zone 2 runs, it's probably going to be at least a minute slower than maybe what your goal race pace, if you have that in mind, what it is. So the process, the fuel, I got to read my notes here real quick. Process fuel to, okay, so I mentioned that before. So as you're going through zone 2, it takes less demand out of your system, so you're able to process fuel as you're going along, so you're able to digest food and your stomach can work properly. All the blood's not going to your muscles to make you run faster and pump your heart and get everything going, because the harder you go, the more your heart's working, the less blood flow is going to your organs because they're not vitally important to keep you alive at that exact moment. So your stomach does not process food and you can't process fuel. So zone 2, training in that, doing your long, slow rides and runs will help your body figure out how to process foods while you're doing a workout. So it's important in that way. And my next note here is it helps you utilize fat stores. So the lower the zones and the more time you spend in it, the better you are at burning fat. That's if somebody's doing kind of a weight loss program, they want to do a lot of zone 2 type of lower intensity type of work for longer periods of time, because it helps you burn fat better, and that's your body's more efficient at burning fat in those lower zones. Like I said, the key is to know your zone. So if you don't know what zone you're supposed to be in, that's important too. So you want to do a fitness test periodically. I'd have my athletes do a 1.5 mile run, kind of all out. They would do a warm up and then they do a 1.5 mile all out. And then the average heart rate is where they go and base their heart rate zones off of. You can also there's some calculations. I think it's 220 minus your age, and then you can get your zones off percentages. You can Google it and find that kind of stuff. I've also done videos on that. So test and retest. So you make sure, because those zones should change over time. You should get more efficient in your zones. You shouldn't be pushing as high of a heart rate during that 1.5 miles all out. So just make sure you're testing and retest so you can find those zones. I would avoid looking at your splits on your run in these long zone 2s or your rides. Don't get caught up on speed or pace. So zone 2 is purely off of effort or heart rate, and it's not based off of speed. It's interesting to see, so maybe you're not working as hard, but you're getting a little bit faster, or maybe it's just a windy day and you couldn't work as hard and you can't go as fast because it spikes your heart rate. So I would avoid being stressed out about your speed and your bike splits or your pace or anything like that. And if you do feel good, now's not the time to sit there and push it harder. It's like, okay, well, I feel good, so I'm gonna, instead of doing my 15-mile run at a 10-minute per mile pace, which usually gets me in my zone 2, I'm gonna push for 9-minute miles, and then you go out there and kind of crush yourself, and it kind of defeats the purpose of working in that zone 2. So if you are feeling good, stay in that zone, run it out, and just, an easy day. And it's like that 15 miles felt like nothing. So keep that in mind. Just because you feel good doesn't mean you should push it harder. I tell a lot of people too, and they like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, they go out there and they try to do their zone 2s, and they're like, I have to walk to stay in this zone. You don't have to walk. I would do the slowest jog you possibly can while keeping good form, but you can also do maybe split it up into 5 minutes running, 1 minute walking. So that artificially kind of brings your heart rate down. So it's kind of high, it's creeping up, and then you do your 1 minute walk, it goes down. So it kind of comes back up. So the average kind of stays in your zone 2, but it's a nice way to kind of, like I said, artificially get that heart rate down. So you don't have to walk. Just as easy as possible, especially when you're first starting out doing these zone 2 runs. A lot of people are just used to, well, I just run and my pace is what it is. I do the best I can, and when I'm gassed out at the end, hopefully I can make it home. Make sure you're pacing yourself, and by doing that, staying in your zones or staying in your effort level. But like I said, you don't have to walk. You don't have to do, this 10 miles is going to take me forever because I have to walk in order to stay in zone 2. Well, there's a little bit of give and take. You don't have to be so, bent on those heart rate zones. You can also sprinkle in a little bit of effort and level of effort. So it's kind of like a little bit of an art form, but a little bit of math and science mixed in there. It's kind of a big jumbled mess. And if you don't like gray area, this zone 2 is not exactly going to be an easy concept for you to kind of understand. But that's kind of the summary I want to go through live today. Zone 2, it's gray, it's nebulous. But just make sure you kind of have a good game plan. You don't have to walk, but you do have to stay in a nice, easy pace. Don't make it too easy. Try to find your zones if you want a little bit of math behind it. So find your zones, retest, and you should get better over time. And don't force the pace to be what you want it just because you want to match a pace. You're going for a race pace, unless you're training for like a standalone marathon, then you might do that. But anyway, so that's zone 2. It's just, hopefully these tips kind of help you out and give you a good idea. And if you have any questions, post them in the comments or whatever. I'll try to address them. But hopefully that helped you out a little bit. And have a good Monday, and we'll talk to you later.